Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the four Gospels and looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. And today we are looking at Jesus being placed on the cross, and this is actually takes place in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm going to primarily come out of Luke and look at a little bit of John with this one, but I encourage you to read all four accounts here because they do, give different perspectives of Jesus being put up on the cross as he was. And so, again, I'm going to come from Luke 23 here, verses 32 through 43, and then I'm going to read a little bit of John at the end. But if you were with me yesterday, Jesus was led away to be crucified, and so now they've put him up, or what we're going to read, they're going to place him up on the cross. So starting with verse 32 here, it says, two others, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him. When they had came to a place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross, and the criminals were also crucified, one on his right and one on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. We need to keep that mindset, right? Because you think about that so often when people do things that harm us, our first reaction is to get even with them. And I know that's mine. And so, Jesus's first reaction was to pray to God and ask God to forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And so they're literally nailing him to a cross through his wrist or through his hands. And it's just brutal. He had already been whipped and beat and all this stuff. And so he tells them, God, to forgive them, for they don't know what they do. And then the soldiers go on. And so we see, and the soldiers gambled for his clothing by throwing dice. The crowd watched, and the leaders scoffed. He saved others. They said, let him save himself if he is really God's Messiah, the chosen one. The soldiers mocked him too by offering him a drink of sour wine. They called out to him, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. A sign was fastened above him with these words, this is the king of the Jews. If you read in other versions of other chapters, John's account, I think, is one of them. The Jewish leaders were actually upset that they put this is the king of the Jews, and wanted them to change it to he claimed to be the king of the Jews, but the Pilate refused to change it. So thought that was an interesting thing that you see there, because he was king of the Jews. On verse 39, one of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed, so you're the Messiah, are you? Prove it by saving yourself and us too while you're at it. But the other criminal protested, don't you fear God? Don't you fear God even when you have been sentenced to die? We deserve to die for our crimes, but this man hasn't done anything wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus replied to him, I assure you today you will be with me in paradise. That's an awesome scene there. And so we get into John. I wanted to read John 25 through 27 because we see an interesting tidbit here as well. As so verse 25 says, near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, this is John, he said to her, woman, here is your son, and to the disciple, here is your mother. From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. And so from that time on, John took care of Jesus' mother. And so it's an interesting perspective because, you see Jesus, he's hanging on this cross, right? He's already been brutally beat, a crown of thorns shoved on his head, banged, smashed in the head with a rod and a reed, right? And then made to walk all the way out to this place they called the skull. And then he was, basically stretched out, and his arms, most scholars believe, some people say through his hands, but back in that day, the wrist was considered part of the hand as well. More than likely, the spikes were driven through his wrist right here, right? And so that would go all the way through so that you could hang, and then your feet, they would have folded your feet on top of each other, and they would have driven the nail through your feet precisely in a way where then you would have to push up on that. So it would have been extremely painful because while you were hanging with your hands in the air, you couldn't catch your breath and you couldn't breathe. So in order to breathe, you would have to push yourself up on those nails and then get a breath, or a couple breaths, and then let yourself back down. So every time you had wanted to breathe, you were in great agony because not only was it hanging on your wrist, you were also pushing against your feet, and so it was just brutal torture. Like I said, The Romans had perfected how to kill people painfully and slowly, and this is one of them. And so we see that, all this happened. So in this point, Jesus was offered wine mixed with gall to help reduce the pain, but he refused to drink it, right? Gall was generally understood to be a narcotic that would help deaden pain. And so, I mean, that was actually kind of an act of mercy to be offered that, but Jesus refused it because he was going to be suffer fully conscious and with a clear mind. And so you've got to see the commitment in that he was willing to do that, because I'm telling you, you offer me anything to kill some of that pain. I mean, it's horrible pain they're doing it. And so then they go and they throw dice, right? Or cast lots, as some versions say. And that was, basically making a decision by chance. And so they were basically gambling for Jesus's things. And Roman soldiers had the right, whoever was crucifying, they had the right to take for themselves the clothing and the things of those who were being crucified. And so that act fulfilled the prophecy of Psalms 22:18, if you want to go look that up and read that. So then, like I said, they put a sign stating usually what they would do is they would put a sign stating the condemned man's sentence, above them as a warning to whoever, whatever their crime was, they would put that sign up there. Well, Jesus wasn't never found guilty of anything, and so the only accusation that had been made against him was that he claimed to be God or the King of the Jews, and that was his crime. So they put King of the Jews on there, and so the Jewish leaders were upset. They wanted to change the sign. He claimed to be the King of the Jews, but Pilate refused to change it and left it that he was the King of the Jews. And so one of the things I want you to think about, a while back we talked about James and John, right? And where their mother came and asked for them to be able to sit on the left and right hand side of Jesus. And he told them at the time they didn't know what they were asking. And so what we see here is this is what they were asking for. And we see these the two sinners or the two thieves on the cross, right, that were next to him. And they deserved their punishment. They deserved what they got. And even during that time, right, Jesus takes the time to show concern for another human being. Like, he was in suffering, right? He was taking all the sins of the world on himself, and he's just sitting there, telling this one guy, "Hey, man, you're going to be with me in paradise." And then we see the other interaction where he's talking to his mom and to John, and he's showing concern, like even while he's dying on the cross, right? He's showing concern and care for his family, and so he instructed John to care for Mary, right? Who was Jesus's mother, and from what we see there, Mary went to live with John from that point on, and was taken care of. And so, like we've talked about, we can assume at that point that Joseph had passed away. And so it's just interesting to see Jesus. He is hanging on a cross, taking our punishment, our sins on himself, and he's still during that time looking out for the needs of others. The one thief on the cross who stood up for him, and then his mom, and all these things. And so it's just that nature that Jesus has of looking out and caring for other people, and it's something that we need to inherit. Because I'm gonna be honest with you, if I was hanging on a cross like that, I don't think I would be more worried about myself than others during that time. And no, maybe you get a moment of clarity or something like that while that's happening, but I don't know. I don't know where my mind would be, but I don't know if it would be. I definitely don't know. I think it would be where Jesus was. And so, again, as we go through this, we see all these things happen in Jesus. Jesus is placed on this cross for us because of us, right? Where we're just as guilty as the people who put him there, like physically put him there. And so we just need to make sure we remember that, but also just have that awesome attitude that Jesus had of caring for others, even when someone's punishing you, right? He gave forgiveness to them. Like when someone's coming after you, someone's trying to harm you, or maybe someone's talking bad about you or spreading lies about you, or all kinds of things. I mean, they did all that stuff to Jesus, and what did he do? Yeah, he could have retaliated. He could have snapped his fingers. All he had to do was snap his fingers, but he didn't. He just said, "Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Right? They don't. They don't know what they're doing. So forgive them for it. And that's the same attitude that we need to have and try to work to develop. It's hard. It goes against our human nature, but it is what we need to strive for. As always, I appreciate everyone for watching and turning in and coming along this far. Tomorrow we're going to see the death of Jesus, and then from there, it's sad, but then from there we go to the rejoice into his resurrection. We're going to look at all that. And again, we're getting closer and closer to the end of this study. We're on day 237 now, and we'll push along until we reach the end. But I really appreciate everyone who's stuck around this far. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and do that. We're going to continue to publish different studies, different things. We're looking at changing up some things, so we're looking forward to that. But as always, I appreciate everyone for watching.